So the tank is full, and so far I see no evidence of any leakage or seepage at any of my joints, either where it connects into the tank with the plumbing fittings or the hose clamps and such, and the PEX clamps and everything. So that's all good news. And back under the back deck here, back down into the bilge. So there's the holding tank connection, and it's nice and dry. And oh, that's not good. There's a dribble of water. Where's that coming from? I guess I better investigate. I don't like the look of that. Okay, obviously I was aiming for perfection on this, that I would put all these in, both tanks, hook up all the plumbing, fill them with water, and it would be perfect. That's what I was hoping for, and it was pretty much what I was expecting. But it ends up the holding tank is perfect. I find no evidence of any leakage there. It's been full for, I don't know, well over an hour, and there hasn't been a drop. The water tank has some leaks, and where it's leaking, here, let me show you. So I originally made the tanks, I glassed them on the inside, and I wrapped the glass up and right out to the outside edge of the tank, and then the lids, I had them upside down and I glassed them right from side to side. So they're totally encased in glass, and they got multiple coats of resin, and I'm confident they're waterproof. And then what I did when I put the lids on is I made, for the holding tank, I made thickened resin with Cabasil silica, fumed silica, and which is Cabasil, and milled fibers to thicken the resin and make kind of a paste. And I ran that all around the edges of the holding tank, and then set the lid down into that, stapled it, and then glassed it. And the hope was that that paste I made up of thickened resin with glass fibers in it would be a sealant to keep any water from finding its way out. And this is only when the tanks are full to the top, to where there's no more space. And then I wrapped it all with fiberglass on the outside and put them in here. And so the holding tank, that worked great. Now on the water tank, I finished the interior of the water tank with gel coat, because I've read that it's okay for potable water if you gel coat the interior. It's safe to drink. Now we don't really plan to drink it, but we'll, brush our teeth and that type of thing. So it's nice that it's not tasting like fiberglass. The boat my dad built back in 1975, he just glassed the interior of a plywood tank and glassed the exterior, same idea as this. And I'll bet you it was 5 to 10 years before the water quit tasting like fiberglass. So this one, two things. One, I did it with gel coat. The other is it sat all winter with the lid off, so it could thoroughly air out, vent off whatever odors there might be. And there was no smell of gel coat. So on the water tank, instead of using resin and thickening it, I used gel coat and thickened it and made a gel coat paste and put around the top. And it's hard to say whether I just didn't do a good job putting it on, or whether it just didn't seal as well or whatever. But I've got not a lot of spots, but a few. So I've gone around. I can see, let me get here. You can just see a little drip of water every once in a while. You can barely get at it, but there's a little drip of water. And I've gone around with a piece of paper, and I've just taken a piece of paper, dropped it down in the slot, and slid it along. And anywhere it came up wet, like there, I know there's a leak, so I've marked it. And there's only a few spots, maybe 4 spots on the tank, where I guess it just didn't seal it good enough. And then I only put one coat of resin on this when I glassed it. I didn't put multiple coats because I really wasn't figuring there's any reason for any water to be on the outside of it. And my thinking was it would be sealed on the inside. So what I'm going to do now is lift the tank out after I drain it, obviously, and resin it up good around the edge of the joint there and try to get it sealed up. And I hope I can. The water tank is unfortunately the one that will regularly get filled right to the top, because we'll fill it with the filler until it spews out top, and it'll be the hose full right to the top until we use a little bit of it and drain it off. The holding tank hopefully will never get filled right to the top, because that's not a good place to get to. And obviously it starts out empty, and when you think it's getting full, you got to pump out. So it isn't leaking, and I'm going to resin around the top of it just for double make sure. But the water tank, I have to do it because I have to get this thing watertight. So now it's time. Both tanks are sitting here full, but now I guess it's time to drain them and then disconnect what I have to so I can lift them up out of here and make them waterproof. Time for an update on the water tanks. It's been 8 days since I last talked about this ordeal. So yeah, I had water leakage issues at the top of the water tanks, and I pulled them out and went back to work on them. So let me kind of show you what I've been doing here. So both tanks are back in the bilge of the boat where they will stay forever, and I'm not taking them out again in the foreseeable future. Hopefully never ever. So yeah, I disconnected what I had to on the lines and set the tanks up on top, and then I put 2 coats of resin around the top edge, a couple inches down and out 1.5 inches or whatever on top, around both tanks, all the way around the perimeter. I did it 2 coats, let it sit overnight, and then in the morning I set them back down in, hooked up all the plumbing again. I didn't refill the holding tank again. It didn't seem to leak the first time, but I figure everything I'm doing on the water tank, I may as well do it on the holding tank while I'm at it. It won't spend its life getting filled right to the top. Hopefully it'll never get filled right to the top, because then you're kind of desperate and you need a pump out right now. So the plan will be to get a pump out before that happens. Whereas the water tank, most times when we head out, it will be filled right to the top. So yeah, I put them back in, refilled the water tank, and so what I would do is on the fill hose here, I would fill it up and then put a piece of masking tape where the water was, and in theory, that should not move, you would like to think. But it did again. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. So I went around with my little paper strip around the edges, and one spot was still leaking. Not bad, but it wasn't watertight. So that time I just, I had to disconnect a little bit. This hose right here, had to disconnect it. Other than that, I could just lift the tank up a couple of inches so the top corner was accessible. I did it on both tanks again, and I gave it another coat. And then I set it back down in again, and I filled it up again, and it still leaked. And that time I had slopped a little water on top, and I wasn't sure just where all I had slopped it. So when I went and did my little paper test, there were a couple of spots that were getting wet, and I wasn't sure if they were leaks or my sloppiness. And my wife suggested, Lisa, why don't you lift it right up out of there and set it up on the floor. So I put another piece of plywood in this area here and set the water tank right up on top and fill it sitting up on the floor where you can see the entire tank, where when it's down in the bilge here, you can't really see what's happening. So the only issue with that is the bottom of it is angled to the slope of the V. So sitting up here, it meant it was sitting a little kind of tipped. But I did that. I set it up top, hooked all the hoses back up so it'd be watertight, filled it again, and it so when the air is going out this little pinhole, or there are actually two little pinholes, air flows through a void easier than water. So it was almost sealed up to the point where it took, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours of refilling the hose and letting it bleed off air and drain down, and then refilling the hose and let it bleed off. It took 3 or 4 hours for the air to leak out the little pinholes and let the tank become fully filled with water till there was no air in it. And then there was that same spot back. It's about 3 feet from the back of the tank on the keel corner, just about where the closest foot of that ladder is sitting. Tiniest little pinhole of water, like a drip that didn't even run down in the one spot, and the other spot was slightly more. So it ran down the tank. So now the tank is sitting on this plywood, and it made about 1.5 inch circle of dampness. I think it might even be that spot right there got damp where the water ran down the side of the tank. Other than that, the tank was bone dry from end to end. All the fittings were dry. The floor had no drips of water on it. So those other spots that I was starting to wonder about were just my sloppiness. There was no additional leaks. So this time, after I got it up there, I drained off a couple of inches out of the top of the tank, and then I hooked the shop back up to it and tried to suck air out of the tank so any moisture in those holes would get sucked out. I left it for a couple of hours, and then I, with the vacuum running, put some resin on, hoping maybe it would draw it in a little bit, although resin's pretty thick and doesn't likely draw into these minute pinholes very well. But I put the vacuum on, did some resin, hoped it would draw in a bit, shut the vacuum off, and then I added another layer of the 1.5 ounce mat, just a patch about 3 inches by 6 inches over that one spot that was leaking, and resined that in. And then a couple of hours later, I gave it another coat of resin, and then I let it sit overnight. And the next morning, I filled the tank again. I'm not sure how many days in that was. This was a couple of days ago now. Filled the tank again, put my tape on the hose where it was sitting, and watched it ever so slowly dropping. Like, it took what, half an hour maybe. It dropped 6 inches in the hose. So at that rate, to get the air out of the tank and replace it with water would have taken probably a day or two of refilling the hose and letting it drain down. It was that slow. And I decided at that point, I'm not even sure if water will go out that small a leak or if it will not. Even if it does, it's going to be a rate of, like, I don't know, maybe a teaspoon every 3 or 4 hours. And so I'm just, this is the only project on this boat that has been so frustrating. Some things have taken longer than I would have hoped, but they get done. But this water tank, I just decided, you know what? I'm beating my head against the wall here. So I put it in. Oh, and so yeah, the tank sat on this floor for a day and a half, filled either full or almost full. and there wasn't one drip of water anywhere from end to end on the, so when it was sitting, because it was on an angle, all this top edge here was full of water. The water would have been kind of going across the corner here and then eventually filled up till it was full right all the way up. So having the one side, the bottom, the fittings, everything was submerged for like a day and a half, and there wasn't one speck of water anywhere. And so I decided to put the tank back in where it goes, hook it up. And so when we fill the water up right to the top, there's a possibility there will be a teeny little tiny dribble of water coming out, a little pinhole, or possibly it won't even come out because it's water's thicker than air. It will go into the bilge. Once we use a little water, it won't be right full to the top anymore. And if it does leak, it's going to be, like I say, a teaspoon maybe every 3 or 4 hours. It'll go into the bilge, and if enough of those teaspoons happen, the automatic pump will throw it overboard. And once we have the tank less than full right to the top, it won't be an issue, and it's just time to move on. So I wish it was 100%. And again, the tank is sitting here right now. It's full, and full but not full right up to the top. I just filled it, and over the course of about 4 or 5 hours, it drained down from where that tape is down to where you can see in the hose. You can just see the shadow of the water in the hose right here. So it drained down to that point. Bilge is bone dry, and I'm done with it. Moving on, putting a floor in, hoping in real life there won't actually be any water getting the bilge, because I'd love a bone dry bilge, but worst case scenario, there will be a teaspoon or so get in there.